tremendous tribute. If you looked at the property damage in a place like St. Paul, you know, they were very critical of the approach we took in terms of how could you have so much force displayed on the street. You notice the officers were trained for absolutely maximum restraint, and we didn't have the issues at all. I think I'm done with the computer, folks, so you're all right. What I want to tell you about, and what I want to be able to take questions about, is this. In terms of Guantanamo, we have a very hot debate going on in this country right now that's continued out of the election. I think you heard some of it, those of you who were present for the presentation at the club before. And the debate is, what do we do about people who are terrorist combatants? They're not just combatants, they're what we call unlawful enemy combatants. An unlawful combatant means they're not a soldier in a uniform, they're not recognized as an officially state-sponsored person who's in the military serving. There's somebody who is here trying to destroy our country that is not managed or controlled or directed by, you know, an organized military apparatus of any kind. What do we do about those folks when we pick them up? And there's been a hot debate about Guantanamo. You may have seen during the campaign, the president campaigned on closing Guantanamo. President Bush said that he should close Guantanamo too. There's been a hot debate over whether Guantanamo should be closed. I just want to put this issue in perspective. Number one, we're dealing with a very small number of people. There are currently 21, total of 21 people who are subject to military tribunals who are at Guantanamo. Number two, they got to go somewhere. And you notice that the president very recently issued a statement saying, I support military tribunals, and we got to keep these people in the military system. It's a very different kind of a person, having been involved in these kinds of investigations and in some of these cases, than somebody in the criminal justice system. When we have a criminal justice matter, we're not worried about intelligence. And let me just give you an example, a local example of what I'm talking about, of when we are worried in the terrorist context, because then the intelligence becomes very, very important. We had a case, as has been reported publicly, involving a fellow named Haroon Rashid. Mr. Haroon Rashid was out in Lakewood, living in Lakewood. The week after 9/11, he worked a way to get himself to the Middle East. Next time we saw him, he showed up on a battlefield in Afghanistan. The intelligence that came on a need-to-know basis and has been publicly reported in court proceedings showed that he was involved in a training camp, an Al-Qaeda training camp. He went from here to there. He was then found putting explosives on the bodies of U.S. servicemen out there. The idea was that if we came to retrieve somebody who had been killed, that person would be hurt who was doing the retrieval. Okay, we got this information. He comes back to Colorado. He is prosecuted. He comes to the attention of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Ultimately, he's committed other crimes, other state crimes that are not related to what he did there. It's a lot easier, I will tell you, to prosecute somebody who comes in on a terrorist investigation on a state offense where you don't have to reveal your sources that are overseas, particularly in a military environment, than if you have to do those things. In that case, he was prosecuted by a state prosecutor, Carol Chambers, out in Arapahoe County. He served some time, and then he was deported. It's a great example of the person was in the country, we removed him from the country. Had we had to go in a case like that and deal with the person who is on the battlefield, you begin to get into lots of issues in terms of the collection of intelligence. How did we know that he was doing these things on the battlefield that I described? You know, I don't know about that because I'm a criminal justice person. I have no access to military intelligence or something like that. How do we make sure that there aren't other attacks against our servicemen and women who are someplace, potentially in harm's way? The military has a way of dealing with military situations. When we put that in the criminal justice system in this country, we have to disclose information. It's a constitutional right for defendants to do that. So anything that the military picks up would have had to be a public document. It may have been a document ultimately that only a judge could see, but the risk of having it leaked out is tremendously great. We already know, for example, with the World Trade Center bombers in 1993, that one of the lawyers for one of the convicted terrorists, the 93 bombers, who's now serving time down in Florence, one of those lawyers was herself later prosecuted and convicted for smuggling documents from her client out of prison to an Al-Qaeda cell. We cannot have a risk of people who are involved and potentially going back to the battlefields and have them in our criminal justice system. We can't have that risk of having that information disclosed in a civilian court proceeding in our country. So we're going to have to do something with these folks. Should they stay in Guantanamo? Apparently there's some kind of a consensus now that they shouldn't be there. Should they be in the military system? By all means. The military system and the rights that those detainees get are the same rights that any of you who served in the military would get in a court-martial, plus some additional rights. You have more of a choice of your selection of counsel. You still have a right to be able to confront your accuser all the way up to the point of anything that might have been involved in terms of the seizure of the evidence itself. That's the crucial difference. The one major difference that a person in the military tribunal faces in terms of law is that they do not have the right to be able to have everything seized by a search warrant. And we don't have soldiers out exercising search warrants on the battlefield. That's the only major difference. It's not the same as being in federal court, but a lot of the due process protections are there. They're treated humanely. I've been to these facilities, and they're treated very humanely. They should not be introduced in a population that is a civilian population. They are not criminals in the sense of the penal system that says we're going to remove them for that reason. They pay their debt to society, then they come back and join us. They are people who need to be removed for the cessation of hostilities against the U.S. for fear that they will show up on a battlefield somewhere and hurt our folks. That's the distinction. I think it's a small price to pay for 21 people who are going through that justice system. To the extent the president can make it a better system, it's fantastic and great. But I was very pleased to see him back off his statements against military tribunals, come back and say, yeah, we need a tribunal system, it just needs to be a stronger system. I want to thank you very much. Are there questions that you might have? We have maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes for questions. Yes, thank you.
One question always comes up in my mind in these circumstances, and that is the so-called death sentence.
The death sentence, yes.
I would like to you call it capital punishment, you call it anything you want to. Subject is death, gone.
Yes. We have very strong feelings about the death penalty in this country. I guess I have a unique situation because as a prosecutor I sought the death penalty several times. Didn't get it, by the way, but sought it. There's still a federal death penalty, and it actually is applied with more consistently than the state penalty here. I would tell you that you can have a hot debate over is it a deterrent, is it appropriate. I personally think that for the most severe offenses, it's very appropriate. I would tell you, though, that it is a tremendous investment to make in terms of judicial resources. As a U.S. attorney, you have tremendous criminal discretion to prosecute somebody. You can literally not prosecute somebody, and the Attorney General of the United States has nothing to say about it. If they don't like you, they fire you. They did that with a few people. We've all faced tough issues with the Maine Justice Department from time to time. One of the fired U.S. attorneys in the controversy, David Iglesias, gave me the pin that I like to wear. He's a true patriot. He's actually at Guantanamo now. When he was done serving, he went back to be a prosecutor in Guantanamo to serve his country. I would just tell you that make the investment in capital punishment, we have to be willing to really put in the time and trouble and recognize that the other side, the best law firms in the world will volunteer the time and resources on pro bono representation for those folks. And so you're really in for a fight if you seek the death penalty. But I would argue that it is warranted in the most extreme cases. By the way, very few cases. I had 3,000 cases last year. We had 1 death penalty case last year, so it doesn't happen very often. And the reason we had it, I think, was we got the Supermax prison. When 2 people literally on videotape cut a person up into little pieces with a knife, while he's alive, they begin cutting him up. They cut out all of his organs and leave them on the floor. And so, you got to do something very serious with an offense like that. And, if we don't have the death penalty, I won't lose any sleep over it either. I'm just fine. But thank you very much.